What's going on, folks? Ted from Immersion here, and I think it's time that we once again have a conversation about Counterspell. That's right. What's going on, folks? I just wanted to talk to you a little bit more about Counterspell as it's appeared in the playtest packet 7. We'll talk about what I just did there with a new piece of tech that I have that's pretty cool I want to talk about. But yeah, I made my video on Unearthed Arcana spells where I talked about every adjustment that was made in playtest packet 7. Obviously, one of the biggest ones there being Counterspell. And then I took a screenshot of the new adjustment and I posted it here on the YouTube community page as well as on my other social medias and said kind of, what do you all think about this change? And what actually surprised me is an overwhelming amount of you love the change as it is and would love to see what's already written printed and in the final version. Now, I know I'm in some instances in the minority when it comes to the fact that I like Counterspell as it is in 5e. I like the weird interactions with counterspelling a counterspell. I don't have any issues with that. I know a lot of people take offense to it. They don't like it. They think it ruins the game. It slows things down. And everybody's obviously entitled to their opinions on that. But I'm still not sure. Jury's out for me on how I feel about this new one. I want to try to play test it. But I also want to say this is an opportunity for, please, in any of those other videos or posts, don't go after people. Don't go flaming or trolling or attacking people based on their opinion. Everybody's entitled to it. A lot of people have different thoughts on this. And it also, I mean, this is also a playtest, right? So what you see in this video might not actually be what we ultimately get in the final 2024 books. It might change again. It might change in the next Unearthed Arcana for all we know. But there was a lot of people that really like it and are like, print it, it's good. And there was a spectrum of answers as well. Some people were like, hardcore, no, keep the 2014 version. A bunch of you were like, keep this 2024 version. And then there were people that kind of fell in the middle where they're basically like, I like some aspects of it, but not others. If you tweak this one thing, if you let you upcast it, maybe that would be better. And some people also even brought up one of the most epic moments of the last episode of Critical Role Campaign 1, how that epic moment would happen if this version of Counterspell existed, which in theory is true, but either way. So we're going to jump in because I also want to talk about a lot of the different interactions with this version of Counterspell has with other things within the Unearthed Arcana, as well as things within the base game that I hadn't really thought about when I made the last video, but many of you pointed it out to me in the comments, so I definitely think it's worth mentioning. So I did want to talk real quick about the camera that I'm using to film this video, which has been filming the video all time so far, which is the OBSbot Tiny 2, not to be confused with OBS, the software, totally different things. And the team over at OBS sent this over to me to basically just play around, review, and see what I thought about the camera. It is a 4K 60 FPS camera. We're filming in 4K here. And what I think is remarkable for a webcam, what I put up on my monitor, I just plugged it in, and what you're seeing is that base quality with no color correction adjustments of any kind. Now, obviously, you can tweak this and adjust colors and add LUTs and whatnot to really make it fit whatever your theme is. But for a standard out-of-the-box webcam, this is pretty nuts. It also has, obviously, you saw gesture control. It has audio control where you can say things and it'll start doing it, track, zoom, whatever. And then it also, again, has tracking where it is on a pivot gimbal where you can move over to the side and it'll follow you. And that can be more useful depending on the type of streams or videos that you make. It is a little bit on the pricey side, I will say that, but I do have a discount code that'll get you a little bit of money off of it to help lessen that blow a little bit. It is also an affiliate link. It'll be at the top of the video description, so if you click it, I'll benefit monetarily if you're kind enough to use that link. But yeah, I just wanted to talk about it. I'm curious, with a tracking moving webcam, if this was for a D&D battle cam, like for a stream that you're watching, would having a tracking camera like track when somebody picks up a mini and moves it, would that be a cool thing? What do you think about that? Because that's what I might end up using this camera for ultimately. It also is a really cool concept where you basically just, it attaches to its sort of monitor attachment with a magnet, which is pretty neat. All right, so that's enough about the camera. Let's talk about Counterspell. So if we pull it up right here, here it is in the Unearthed Arcana playtest 7. The big shift is it is still a reaction. They did clarify that it only works with spells that have verbal, somatic, or material components. This is basically to alleviate some of the confusion around the usage of things like Subtle Spell, which removes components. It still has a range of 60 feet. The big change is, though, instead of making a spellcasting ability check, you're now making a Constitution saving throw. And at first, I didn't think anything of that. I was like, okay, they're just changing it to Constitution. That's fine. But what many of you brought up to me is that the shift from ability check to saving throw changes a bunch of things. For one, a bard's, like the lore bard can, boost their own ability check, for example, and they can give out, they can use cutting words to lessen an ability check, but they can't use cutting words to lessen a saving throw. But also, it has interactions with things like legendary resistance, right? So legendary resistance is if a creature fails a saving throw, they can choose to succeed instead. That now applies to Counterspell. Previously, Counterspell, again, was an offset, a contested kind of ability check. Well, not even contested, it was just a roll against the level of the spell being cast. But the fact that it was ability check meant that legendary resistance wouldn't work. So if you're fighting a high-level creature that has legendary resistance, chances are, if they still have them and you Counterspell, they're just going to legendary resistance away your Counterspell and fire off their spell as normal, which does lessen its overall potency in that respect. But it also is potentially a means for you to counter legendary resistance and burn through them by using Counterspell. But that's something to consider. Another thing I wanted to talk about is older spellcasters, like this Lich from the Monster Manual, had spell slots like a caster does. You can see here, right? 4 slots, 3 slots, and so on all the way up. Whereas newer monsters don't have spell slots anymore. They have spells they can cast at will, spells 3 times per day each, and once per day. And some of you had suggested, like, oh, well, now that will suck because it says the spell slot isn't expended. And the concept is these don't technically have spell slots. So if this Bale here tries to cast Dominate Monster on me and I counterspell it, it loses that entirely because it says it doesn't lose the slot and there is no slot. That is a good question and definitely a point of clarification for someone like Jeremy Crawford to come in and design and tell us. I'm still considering the once per day use of Dominate Monster essentially as a spell slot, though. So I think that's how it's supposed to be read. Whereas if I cast Counterspell on their Dominate Monster, they lose the action of casting Dominate Monster, but they still retain the ability to cast Dominate Monster. Now, if those of you who brought that up were correct and said that, in fact, counterspelling this because it no longer has a hard-coded slot means it's gone and that ability usage is lost, that makes Counterspell immensely more powerful for the players and much less powerful for the monsters, and that I'm not okay with. If it's going to be changed, I want the change to be wholesale across the board, works for monsters, works for players as well. So I don't know about that. I think the design intention is that it's because, again, if it's only specifically referencing slots, that's definitely only talking about monsters versus players, because we know that all of the monsters in the monster manual, for example, like that Lich that we clicked on before, this is going to be adjusted to be more in line with these newer monsters when the 2024 revisions come out. They're all going to fall into this area. So my assumption is that, again, also, funnily enough, the Bale requires no material components, so potentially you could get around the counterspell in some instances there. But either way, I think the concept is supposed to be that if I were to cast Dominate Monster, you counterspell me, and I succeed or I fail the counterspell, I would lose the action of casting Dominate Monster and still retain the ability to use it. But again, it's definitely worth mentioning that we should figure out whether or not that's how it works. Another thing that was brought up is that it makes sorcerers one of the best users of Counterspell because sorcerers get the Constitution saving throw. So if we were to scroll up, right, you're going to get Constitution saving throw proficiency. So one, you're going to be one of the best at countering it because you get Constitution saving throw proficiency, whereas like wizards and warlocks don't. Another thing to consider is currently Warcaster provides you advantage on saving throws for maintaining concentration on spells. I wonder if they'll tweak Warcaster to provide you advantage on Constitution saving throws, just like in relation to spells, so it would also provide counterspell bonus. But also, it makes Heightened Spell, the sorcerer meta magic, much more useful. It says when you cast a spell that forces a creature to make a saving throw to resist its effects, you can spend 2 sorcery points to give one of the target of the spell disadvantage on its saving throws against that spell. Counterspell now being a Constitution saving throw means that I could hit you with a counterspell and make sure you're forced to have disadvantage on that counterspell by using Heightened Spell, which is an interaction that obviously would not have happened before because it was an ability check. Another thing that is interesting is that Dispel Magic has not been changed in this instance. To use Dispel Magic, it is still that same ability check. And it's also worth mentioning that they altered the wizard, the Abjuration Wizard, because somebody did bring that up in one of the videos. They said you can't do this because think about the changes to the Abjuration Wizard. An Abjuration Wizard used to have an ability. If we were to go to D&D Beyond and look at the Abjuration Wizard, they had an ability that specifically made them better at counterspelling than other characters. So if we look at School of Abjuration at 10th level, when you cast an Abjuration spell that requires you to make an ability check as part of casting that spell, as in Counterspell and Dispel Magic, you add your proficiency bonus to that ability check. With this no longer being an ability check for Counterspell, that makes the current version of Abjuration kind of pointless. So some people brought up, well, that's silly. They adjusted that. Now Abjuration Wizard's 10th level ability is much weaker. But they did have an updated version of the Abjuration Wizard here in the Unearthed Arcana, and as such, they adjusted that 10th level ability. So if you see this now, it is Spellbreaker. You always have the Dispel Magic spell prepared. You can cast it as a bonus action, and you add your proficiency bonus to its ability check. So they have removed entirely the reference to Counterspell from the Abjuration Wizard's ability here. And I don't know, but this is actually pretty powerful, taking Dispel Magic always prepared for you, meaning you don't have to use it as one of your daily preparations. It is cast as a bonus action, which is nice, and it still gets the proficiency bonus. But I'm curious now, just talking through this, what do you think? One, what do you think about the concept of monsters that have these sort of spells per day and not traditional spell slots? I think my estimation of it was correct in that if you utilize this and your Dominate monster is stopped, you don't lose the usage of Dominate monster. You just have to wait potentially till next turn to use it again. And again, like I said, these kind of spellcasters with slots from the monster manual will be adjusted when future 2024 versions come out. But yeah, it's interesting that it makes the sorcerer potentially a better user of Counterspell than someone like the Abjuration Wizard, who is still going to be good at things like Dispel Magic, but there's adjustments there. You also have to, again, consider the factor in of things like Bardic Inspiration, cutting words, things like that will all have different interactions with these adjusted versions of Counterspell. So I still am not sure how I feel about it. Like I said, I still want to get a chance to try to play test it and try it out. But yeah, I'm very curious what you all think. Do you think Warcaster will be changed to cover advantage on Constitution saving throws like this against Counterspell, or will it remain the same? And I mean, like I said, there's also the chance that they tweak it, right? They might tweak aspects of it. I saw some people suggesting, which I thought was kind of a good idea, was the concept of maybe the upcast mechanic for Counterspell is you upcast it, and then it allows you to waste the spell slot. Because currently now it doesn't have any upspell or upcast mechanic either. You could be counterspelling a 3rd level spell, a cantrip, a 1st level spell, or a 9th level spell, and it's all the same with using a 3rd level abjuration spell. You don't have to bring it up to meet a higher level spell. So I saw various suggestions about that. I thought it would be kind of interesting if it was something like if you cast it, use it casting a spell slot 2 levels higher than the spell being cast. It also forces them to lose the spell slot. Now, that does mean you wouldn't be able to counter 8th and 9th level magics. And I'm okay with that because they are of a higher tier. You could also make it 1 tier higher, 1 level higher. So you could counter 8th level spells, but not 9th. And I'm also okay with that because nothing would suck more than to counterspell a 9th level spell. So this would kind of give you a means to like, hey, I can still upcast it if I want to force them to lose the slot, but I have to do so. I have to make that decision. But then that also gets into the concept of like, how do you know what you're countering? Is the trigger, the counter, it's when someone's casting a spell with verbal, somatic, or material components, do you automatically know what that spell is to know if it's worth you casting Counterspell? Because again, it depends a lot at the table, right? I've seen DMs be like, hey, all right, and he's going to cast Teleport, and then you're like, well, no, Counterspell. But if you're like the DM's like, he's going to cast Sacred Flame, then you might not be like, oh, I'm not going to counterspell a cantrip, but I'll counterspell a big teleport or a meteor swarm or what have you. So I'm curious how you guys handle that as well. We've kind of moved in some instances at my table to be like, I'm going to cast a spell and then see if anybody wants to counterspell it. You don't know if that spell is going to be something like a cantrip or something like, a 5th level fireball. I don't really know if I feel like that was the design intention either. Next time I get a chance to speak with Wizards of the Coast, I will definitely bring that up to ask what the intention is and how they handle it in their games. But I'm curious what you think. How do you handle the dealing with Counterspell as it is currently? And what are your thoughts on Counterspell now that I've brought up some of these additional iterations of it, right? The fact that it works, legendary resistance can just basically cancel out Counterspell entirely now. The fact that sorcerers can use something like Heightened Spell to provide an enemy disadvantage on the con save, possibly turning that failure into a success, but a wizard focusing on abjuration magic will be worse at counterspelling than any generic sorcerer that has access to heightened spell. So I'm very curious how you feel about this. Are there any other interactions that I didn't think about, right? Things that I missed that we still didn't cover in this video? Because, I mean, some people said they should pull it out of the game entirely, which is also an interesting choice. And I thought it was interesting that Counterspell made it into Baldur's Gate 3, but Dispel Magic didn't. And when asked about it, the team at Larian said they basically would have had to double the size of the game if they'd added Dispel Magic in, because of the various interactions Dispel Magic would have had to have with different things in the game. They put in Counterspell because the way it works directly targeted at a specific instance, whereas so many things can be stopped with Dispel Magic. They had to not put it in the game, whereas we're kind of seeing the opposite here. Dispel Magic's being left alone, but Counterspell's being altered. And again, there's nothing to say that next Unearthed Arcana Dispel Magic won't get changed, or Counterspell might not get reverted back. We saw Eldritch Blast and Hex get reverted back. Still no change to Hunter's Mark, though. Hunter's Mark still remains the way it was when they changed it. The last thing I want to say before we close this video out is I also am a little worried about the 2024 release. This may become a future video topic in and of itself, but it is September. We are only a couple months away from the end of the year, and they seem to be doing Unearthed Arcanas every other month, which means we shouldn't be due for a new Unearthed Arcana until November, and you're going to have this release in 2024. I'm not sure that's going to fit, because when are you going to release it in 2024? How much time do you need to get to printers? And then what about the other 2 books that are supposed to come out in 2024? We know you want to do at least some degree of Unearthed Arcana playtest on either the Dungeon Master's Guide or the Monster Manual. Maybe not both, or maybe both. But if you're doing these every other month, that doesn't give you a lot of time to test anything, get viable feedback, and then turn that around and get it to the printers for some sort of release next year. Do we think we're ultimately going to see an increase in the frequency of Unearthed Arcana, or do we think we'll see a delay in the presence of these books maybe going into 2025? I think they've already made a lot of mistakes this year, and delaying the books a year further will just kind of seem like more of a mistake. Although, again, if they come out and are honest and open about why they're making those changes and why things are being delayed, that might get them some leeway. But anyway, I don't know. Let me know your thoughts and opinions in the comments down below. Thanks to OBSbot for sending over the camera that this video has been filming on. I will see you all next time.